Hello chess lovers, I'm back at you with a new video in which we are going to discuss endgame technique, and I think that this example that I have for you today is going to be a particularly good one to discuss a topic that I think is not talked about enough, and that is that very often we have got equal or equal-ish endgames that have plenty of life still in the position, and I would like to explore a little bit these types of endgames and the right mentality and the right way to actually play them. The first thing that I would like to add is that there is a lot of missed opportunities for club level and lower rated players when they look at an endgame like this. They look at the computer's evaluation, it says 0.2 or 3, and they go like, yeah, okay, so it's a draw. And that is just a golden opportunity missed right there to explore what's in this position, what are potential plans that could lead to winning chances, and how they are best countered. So we are learning creating winning plans, creating drawing plans. In general, we are basically mastering endgame technique. So let's see what happened in this actual endgame that I played a couple of weeks ago actually. As you can see, indeed, we are headed after retake on e4 into a very equal-ish endgame, most definitely in terms of material. My Londonista opponent seemed to be dedicated to only one cause, and that was to trade everything off the board, and he did a very good job of that for a while. But was it enough for drawing the game? Well, let's have a look. So, I took back with the rook, which by the way, according to the engine, is the slightly less accurate recapture, and right there I need to slam down on the engine because here we are removing a very important component from the equation, and that is the human factor. And the fact of the matter is that whilst both of them are actually draw, rook takes e4 creates a position where white has far more ways to go wrong than in FE, where it's virtually impossible to go wrong, in fact. And the only reason why the engine still slightly prefers that to black is because structurally it is a little bit more attractive to black. So I took with the rook. My opponent played king f2, and this is the point where you need to really stop, reflect, pause, if you like, do any of those or all of those, and come up with overarching generic plans. I have spoken about this kind of attitude towards endgames already on this channel, but I feel like it cannot be repeated enough. And a lot of the times you will find that lower rated players, weak players here and in similar positions, the only thing they try to do is to attack pawns, and then when said pawns get defended, then they run out of plans, and then they either continue attacking other pawns or randomly lunge forward whatever pawn is coming closest to their hands. So let me model you here what went through my head about how to win this game. So my first objective was to put the rook on e4 instead of taking with the pawn. Then the next objective was to put the king all the way to d5, then play b4, and then try to break the position with g5, f4 or f4 immediately. Now, before I even get into that, by the way, and that's an important thing that I should have started with, it's also very important when you have this position to actually evaluate it. Because if you know the correct evaluation, that helps you a lot in terms of finding your plans, trying to figure out which way to go, and just in general, it gives you a very good direction as to what to do and what to expect. Now, a lot of people would misevaluate this position as slightly better for white, because white has a protected pass pawn, which is a vast misunderstanding of the position, because the reality is that actually black is slightly better due to several factors. One is the more active rook, 2, the more active king, because mine is going to go there, there's can't, and 3, superior pawn structure. And it's very important that we talk about this right now. Why is this pawn structure superior to black? 2 reasons, maybe 3. First, white has a pawn weakness, a backward pawn that is under attack, black doesn't. White has got 3 pawn islands, black has got 2. And last but not least, it's actually this pawn that we could erroneously consider to be an advantage, which is actually a disadvantage in the sense that you can call it a protected pass pawn, but I call it an easily blockadable pawn that creates basically a shelter for my king in the center, allowing me to progress on here. So this is not an asset. This is not value whatsoever because it cannot make any progress. In fact, it is going to become our #1 target once we play king d5 b4, play f4, and by playing f4 break, we are going to isolate this pawn and eventually take it. So it's very important that we have that notion that black is definitely better here, or the degree of how much is most definitely up for debate. And in fact, the higher you go on how good the player it is who is playing it for white, the lower the advantage goes all the way to none whatsoever. I will actually show you the defending method in the very end. So, plan was put the king in d5, play b4, break with f4. Let's see what happened. I played king f7, my opponent played g3. This is presumably to stop f4, but as it turns out, this move actually has a tremendous downside to it, which is not so easy to foresee. King e6, king d5, and rook f1. Now, we have already made absolutely tremendous progress compared to the starting position, because if you compare the two, you realize that my king has become the greatest hero on the board, and in the interim, white has done nothing meaningful whatsoever. So now I play g6, protecting my f5 pawn, and after king d2, it was time to devise a plan, to design a plan to actually win the game. I played b4 as per announced, so I'm going to play out that one too, and now is the time to think about how can we win this game from here on out. And I don't know if my plan was the best according to the engine or not, but I think it's a very clear and clean method for winning an endgame. And by the way, it goes alongside a very commonly known endgame principle, which I believe I have read in Russian endgame books. I think actually my chess coach read it out to me first, because back in the day we were learning from Averbach's endgame books. At this point I need to mention, by the way, that Averbach's endgames books were the absolute kryptonite of endgame knowledge back in the day, and sadly the author of these books, Yuri Averbach, just passed away a couple of days ago, the 100-year-old grandmaster. So this is a bit of a testament to his legacy as well. So the concept, that was a bit of a tangent there, is that if you have got a wing or a certain part of the board where you are clearly dominating, which we can just basically call everything sort of right to the E file or east to the E file, so this bunch here I would label as a big plus for black. Yeah, white has to defend the pawn, white has to watch the pawn break, but with all his might, white is actually successfully holding here. Therefore, and here comes the concept, we need to open a second front, another battleground to spread the defense. It's not quite the same as the two weakness policy, because here you could argue that white doesn't even really have a weakness. It's more of a hitting here, hitting there, and that way thinning the defenses. You could argue that it's the same story. I think it's slightly different, and for that reason we play h5. And this actually seals the deal, believe it or not, but this very simple move actually creates unsolvable problems for white. The idea is very, very brutally simple. I want to play h4, I want to open up the h file, and I want to penetrate on said h file. And white actually does not have, believe it or not, a proper defense against this. They played king e2, I played h4 as per planned, king f4, king f3, excuse me, I took, they took back, and I just pulled the rook back to e7, wanting to go in and in. Now, of course, you may wonder, but hang on, dude, didn't you just open up the h file for their rook? But that's exactly the point. See, that now if they play rook h1, which they didn't, then I can swing across to the other side and now utilize the advantage that we had over there, and that is that now this pawn is marching in, and now we managed to create the very famous Tarrasch rook setup when the rook is supporting the pawn from behind. Takes, takes, and now we are, oh sorry, it's rook takes. Where did I go? Where did I looked at the line with pawn takes back. That wasn't here, was it? Now, so here after take, rook takes, it's just carnage because rook across and rook a2 wins. I'm trying to think. I did look at the line where the pawn took back, and it was absolutely marvelously winning. King e2. Yeah, I don't remember now how that variation occurred. c3, take, king d3 seems to be fine-ish for white, I think. Take. Yeah, king d3, and now after c2, rook c1, they hold. Somehow my king got in on c4, and the white king ended up on d1. But anyway, that's the policy, and that's the idea, that if they play rook h1, you go behind, and now after c3 takes, rook takes, and it's easy peasy. We are hitting too many weaknesses at once, and the two connected pass pawns will decide. And so, because of that is the case, black now can't actually hold up this. And therefore, the game is literally over. And this is now the reason why I am saying to you, or why I was saying, that actually g3 had a major downside when I told you it did. That was exactly this. The 10 moves later, we could execute this h4, h5 idea with an instant opening of the h-file. Now, I didn't quite play the rest of the game very accurately, but I will show you what I did, because I think whilst it may have been inaccurate, it was certainly instructive. He played rook c2 to prevent my rook from coming in and eating all the pawns. So we penetrated on the first rank. Multiple ideas. One of them is to tickle the pawns from the back, and also one from here. King f3 was played, rook a1 was played, trying to trigger a pawn move here. b3, c3. Now I have a protected pass pawn on c3, which is actually blockaded by a rook, which is awful in rook endings, because now a whole entire rook is dedicated to holding one pawn only. So this is just misery. And after king f4, I played check here. And this was a blitz game, so that's my only excuse for not going in for the instant kill here and just win the game. But I wanted to make it very clean and not giving any counterplay whatsoever to my opponent. So he went to munch down all the pawns to disallow any kind of counterplay. And actually, I'm quite proud of the fact that I even threw in this check here, just to be a bit of a pest and forcing the king further away from the main battleground, and only now taking the pawn. And the rest was just very, very clean mop up. The pawn is on king, and pawn up is unstoppable. And a few more moves later, my opponent gave up right here. Now, there is one more thing that I would like to show you about this rook ending that I found fascinating, because afterwards I looked at it and I thought to myself, maybe g3 was the losing move. And I started looking at other ideas here that are not g3. So I think, let me just start. I think I looked at rook c1. Yeah, king e6. And I just tried to play some pass moves here, thinking that, okay, maybe white can hold here. But it's not the case. White has no chance whatsoever of holding, because here I have got f4. And once again, after we break the pawns, the queen side advance of the pawns is going to decide the game. Not to mention that now actually I take this with check, and then I take on d4. So white actually had to play g3 at one point, which would allow me to execute this winning idea. Now, I'm going to leave the best for last, or rather the worst in this case. This endgame, of course, is dead draw. And I saw the idea, but only after I played king f7. And that drawing idea, of course, was to break this pawn chain as soon as possible by a4. Not an easy move to find when your mentality with white is that no matter what you do, it's a draw, because it's even Stevens and I'm just going to defend and it's going to be a draw. If that's your mentality, you are going to miss a move like this, which actually, like this, which secures the draw in the most comfortable fashion. The problem is that I'm just too short to get there. So if my king were on e6, now I could play b4 and after rook c1, king d5, and I'm completely winning. But unfortunately, I'm too short to the party, or too slow. And now after f4, rook takes, rook c5, the rook becomes very active, unlike in the game, which is the key factor in most drawing mechanisms in rook endings, is active pieces. Active rook, active king, you are good. Doesn't matter material, the material matters far less than piece activity. And white would be fine here. And so a4 was the move, and for that reason, by the way, I should have played a4, but I didn't like making my pawn structure rigid like this, because I thought that after a3, this pawn mass has become somewhat useless. Like, I can't really play for the winning ideas that I had in the game, but it's not true, because even here, if I manage to get my king to d5, I can play for very similar ideas to what happened in the game. So a4 would have been the great move here. Instead, my opponent played g3, and now after king e6, it's too late. If they play a4 now, I just play b4, king d5, and this is actually a worse version of the game. So imagine if you played this game, or if you had this position in front of you, and you had, you know, the engine at your disposal, and you turn it on and you go like, oh, 0.2, it's a draw, okay, let's go next. Or you invested like 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes into the different plans that are at this at play in this game, and try to understand the mechanism of how this endgame works, and then walk away with that extra gained knowledge. The two attempts and attitudes lead to so vastly different results. One just leaves you with absolutely nothing other than a stupid engine evaluation. The other one gives you invaluable endgame knowledge and endgame technique ideas that then you can implement in any further games. So when you have got an endgame scenario that you play in a game, even if it ends up in a draw, as long as it is an asymmetrical position where both sides have got various pluses and downs, it is very well worth to invest some time and energy and analyze that position, irrespective of what the engine tells you that is. And you will become, on the other end, a much better endgame player, which I hope this video also served you as such. So that's gonna be it from me now. I do hope to come back with similar endgame videos in the future, but that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, to sub, and to comment, and I will be back with more soon. Thank you.